If you use pretty much any kind of streaming service or cloud storage, maybe even just a news website, you definitely know the feeling. You finish that big show, or maybe you just realize, hey, I haven't actually used this thing in like 3 months. And you think, okay, right, time to cancel. And that's exactly when the whole system seems to morph into this digital maze, almost like an Escher drawing. Suddenly you're being stalled, you're rerouted everywhere, and somehow the button you actually need, it's always grayed out or buried about 5 layers deep in some menu you've never seen before.
Right. And what you're experiencing there isn't just, bad design or some kind of accident.
Yeah.
It's actually recognized now as a really sophisticated and frankly financially motivated type of deceptive design. It's not clumsy coding at all. It's a specific codified technique. We call them dark patterns.
Wow. It's kind of wild that this whole category of digital manipulation actually has a name.
It does, yeah. And the term itself, it's been around for a while now, since about 2010. It was coined by a UX specialist, Harry Brignall. He defined it pretty simply as tricks used in websites and apps that make you do things you didn't mean to. So essentially, we're talking about manipulative user interface UI elements. They're crafted specifically to, well, trick or coerce you into making decisions you probably wouldn't make otherwise, and ones that usually end up benefiting the platform's bottom line, often through recurring charges you didn't want or just a general loss of your own autonomy.
Okay, so if the design team is intentionally making it super easy to sign up, but then, brutally difficult to leave, then our deep dive today is really about pulling apart that deliberate imbalance, that asymmetry. Why is signing up this simple click to subscribe thing while getting out feels like a hard to cancel marathon? We're going to try and expose the psychological toolkit that makes this kind of manipulation so effective almost universally.
Yeah, when you look at that core conflict, effortless entry versus this really laborious exit, it just lays the business goal bare, doesn't it? They're deliberately putting friction into the system, but only at the point where you're trying to maybe save some money or just take back control.
It really is applied behavioral economics right
Yeah.
there on the digital interface. And these tactics, they work so well because they prey on these well-researched cognitive biases. Things that are deeply rooted in just how we as humans tend to make decisions.
Let's start with one I think, honestly, everyone's bumped into, the pre-selected option, that little checkbox that's already ticked for you. Ah, yes, that taps straight into what we call inertia and default bias. People, just generally, we tend to stick with whatever option is pre-selected for us. Doesn't matter if it's an opt-in for auto-renewal or just accepting the current settings as they are. By pre-selecting that option, the company is basically betting that, for most users, the ease of just clicking continue or doing nothing outweighs the effort required to consciously untick that box or change the setting.
That definitely feels like maybe the lowest hanging fruit for manipulation. But then it gets deeper, right? They start leveraging our own feelings, our investments against us.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us squarely into loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy. This is where the platform starts reminding you, sometimes quite forcefully, of everything you stand to lose if you cancel. Maybe it's unused credits you've built up or perhaps losing access to your personalized library or recommendations. They're deliberately making you reluctant to cancel because you perceive this potential loss, even if, realistically, the service isn't actually giving you much value anymore.
Right. They're trying to make you feel almost foolish for thinking about leaving just because you've already put in time or money. And what about when they just swamp you with choices? You click cancel, and suddenly there are 3 downgrade options, an offer to pause, then another confirmation page.
That overload, that's designed specifically to induce decision fatigue. When you're just overwhelmed with excessive complexity, screen after screen, multiple choices popping up and all this is happening, when you're already trying to make a very simple, definitive choice, your cognitive load just spikes. They know perfectly well that many users, just exhausted by the whole process, will simply give up. They'll abandon the cancellation attempt, figuring they'll deal with the painful process later. The system isn't just designed to be difficult, it's designed to be emotionally and mentally draining.
It's honestly staggering when you realize how many of these little annoyances aren't accidental at all. They're actual codified tactics with names. And I guess the most infamous one, especially when we talk about pure obstruction, has to be the Roach Motel.
Yeah, the name really says it all, doesn't it? It's easy to get in, but once you're inside, finding the exit is almost impossible. We see this all the time. The cancellation button is deliberately buried, deep within multiple layers of menus. You might have to click through, say, account settings, then manage subscription, maybe even detour through the help center or contact us just to finally locate that exit door. It's just pure obstruction by design.
Yeah. And then there's that really frustrating thing, forced continuity, that often bites people months after they completely forgot they even signed up for something.
Exactly. That's when your free trial just automatically rolls over into a paid subscription, but without any really adequate or clear or even recent notification about it. Our sources often point to Adobe Creative Cloud as a kind of prime example here. Users might sign up for a short trial, maybe they skim the fine print or forget about it, and then bang, they suddenly find themselves charged for a pretty hefty annual plan that just auto-renewed, even if their actual use of the software dropped off ages ago.
Yeah.
The cost can be really steep off it just because the communication around that transition was deliberately unclear or insufficient.
And what about the more psychological nudges, the emotional stuff?
Right, that moves us into tactics like nagging and confirm shaming. Audible is often cited as a key example here. When you try to cancel Audible, you often get subjected to these multiple repetitive prompts, and they're designed to make you feel guilty. They require what some call forced action, which means you actually have to decline a whole series of offers like those reminders about all your unused credits before you can even get to the final cancellation button. They're systematically playing on those psychological vulnerabilities, especially loss aversion, just to keep you tethered, keep you paying.
And the fact that this stuff is tested so thoroughly and it's so effective at exploiting us, it means these designs aren't just hidden away, they're like institutionalized. Which brings us right to that huge benchmark regulatory case, the one that really pulled back the curtain on just how deep this intentionality runs.
Yes, exactly. The landmark case involving Amazon Prime and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, the FTC.
Yeah.
This case gave us really unprecedented insight into how a massive platform like Amazon designs deception and does it on an enormous scale.
And this is where we learned that almost unbelievable internal name they had for their cancellation process. The infamous Iliad flow.
It's a phenomenal code name, isn't it? When you name your customer cancellation process after Homer's epic poem about the Trojan War, a war that lasted years, well, that tells you absolutely everything you need to know about the intent behind the design. This was basically intentional psychological warfare, purely aimed at customer attrition, making people give up.
It absolutely was. The FTC's complaint just laid bare the sheer mechanical complexity involved. They described this Iliad flow as forcing users to navigate a 4-page, 6-click, 15-option journey. Every single step, every element was specifically designed to discourage you from canceling. They'd use subtle visual tricks too, like really low contrast text for the crucial Cancel Now button, while using bright colors or animations to draw your eye towards the retention offers, like pausing your membership or maybe downgrading.
And the critical part here is the data behind it. These designs weren't just dreamed up. They were the result of systematic A/B testing. Testing focused exclusively on one thing: minimizing churn, keeping people subscribed. The sources we looked at confirmed that these patterns were incredibly successful, increasing retention by anywhere from 10 to even 20% in some documented cases. The success of the manipulation was measurable, quantifiable.
Wow. So the financial incentive was clearly enormous, and it worked. Even though apparently some designers inside the company were raising ethical flags, saying things like they felt they were betraying their users, it took massive legal action to actually force a change.
And the change was significant, yeah. That FTC lawsuit resulted in a substantial settlement, but maybe more importantly, a binding agreement from Amazon to fundamentally simplify its cancellation process. It was basically an acknowledgement that this kind of structural manipulation crosses the line into violating consumer protection law.
Amazon is obviously the huge example, the prime example, you could say. But you and I both know this kind of obstruction, it's rampant across the whole streaming and subscription landscape. Let's talk about some of the others maybe facing scrutiny right now.
Well, look at Netflix, for instance. They've been accused of using tactics like sneaking and pre-selection. When you first sign up, often the highest cost plan is already pre-selected for you. And it's often deceptively labeled with terms like most popular. That's designed to anchor your decision at that higher price point, essentially making the most expensive option seem like the default, the normal choice.
Right. Making the pricey one look like what everyone else is doing. Smart, but sneaky. What about platforms like, say, Disney Plus or Hulu? What kinds of obstruction are they using to keep people on the hook?
They often employ these multi-layered obstruction tactics, along with nagging prompts. So, if you start the cancellation process on Hulu or Disney Plus or Celeste, you might find yourself forced to click through several screens suggesting alternatives. Instead of canceling, why not switch to our bundle plan? Or how about pausing your service for a month instead? It just creates multiple extra opportunities for the platform to try and convince you to stay. extending the whole process way beyond a simple click and really leveraging that decision fatigue we talked about earlier.
It's just staggering how much time and, frankly, money this stuff costs us collectively through these really aggressive retention tactics. But I have to imagine the costs go deeper than just the subscription fee itself. If they're this aggressive about keeping you, it makes me worry about what else they're aggressively keeping, like our data.
That's a really critical point because dark patterns systematically undermine genuine user consent, and that has massive implications for data privacy. They effectively coerce your consent for data collection through these carefully manipulated choice architectures. Think about the cookie banners, the terms you agree to on sign-up.
Yeah, our sources called this phenomenon consent theater, where the interfaces might technically comply with regulations like GDPR in Europe or CCPA in California, but they completely violate the spirit of informed choice.
Exactly right. You see it constantly. These highly visible, often brightly colored, single-click, accept all buttons. Meanwhile, the actual path to genuinely manage your preferences or maybe hit reject all is intentionally buried. It's behind multiple extra clicks, often using faint, low-contrast text, all designed to discourage you from bothering. So yeah, they tick the legal box, but they make the practical choice of refusal incredibly difficult, almost punitive.
And there's that notorious tactic known as privacy zuckering, named after, well, you know.
Yes, indeed. Which essentially refers to the practice of asking for your data for one stated reason, let's say, asking for your phone number for two-factor authentication, for security, but then subsequently using that same data for entirely different commercial purposes like targeted advertising without getting specific additional consent. And if you can't easily cancel your account or remove your details, well, your personal and payment information just stays stored on their servers indefinitely. That increases your risk if there's ever a data breach, and it directly conflicts with regulations like the GDPR's right to erasure, your right to be forgotten.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the data risks, there's this massive societal and sort of psychological toll too. We're literally talking about companies leveraging our psychological weaknesses against us.
And this systemic exploitation, it contributes directly to what researchers are calling digital stress. It fosters this pervasive sense of powerlessness among users online and that erosion of control. It fuels something called digital resignation. That's the state where you just keep interacting with these platforms, even though you fundamentally believe you have no real control over your data or your privacy. You sort of feel compelled to participate, even while knowing you're probably being manipulated.
And we absolutely have to touch on digital equity here. This isn't hitting everyone the same way.
Absolutely not. The harm is disproportionately severe for more vulnerable populations. This includes people with lower digital literacy, maybe the elderly, or those with certain disabilities, who are just far less equipped to navigate these incredibly complex, confusing, or deliberately misleading interfaces. So these practices translate directly into ongoing insidious financial harm and psychological stress, often for the very people who are least able to cope with that extra financial or cognitive burden. It's a real equity issue.
Okay, so the sheer scale of this deception and the resulting consumer harm has, thankfully, triggered a pretty significant global backlash. What does the current regulatory pushback actually look like? Clearly, that Amazon settlement signals this isn't being treated as just a minor annoyance anymore.
No, it's increasingly being treated as a fundamental consumer protection violation, and that's happening globally. In the U.S., the FTC has now mandated the click-to-cancel rule. Basically, cancellation must be at least as easy to use as the method the consumer used to buy. This forces platforms towards implementing that parity rule we discussed.
And internationally, I know the EU's Digital Services Act, the DSA, is taking an even tougher stance.
The DSA is potentially a game changer, yes. It explicitly targets and prohibits these kinds of deceptive design patterns that impair user autonomy or trick users. And the financial penalties behind it are formidable. We're talking potential fines reaching up to 6% of a company's global turnover for systematic violations. That's huge. Plus, you have state laws, like the CPRE in California, adding more layers of protection, specifically prohibiting dark patterns within consent flows for data. The era of just unchecked manipulation seems to be ending.
Right. So with all this regulatory pressure really intensifying, what should platforms and maybe the designers working for them, what should they be doing now to fundamentally shift towards more ethical design and, frankly, mitigate these enormous risks?
Well, the primary mandate really has to be that parity rule. Cancellation must be just as easy as signing up was. In practice, that means a single-page, ideally single-click cancellation option. It needs to work consistently across all devices, desktop, mobile app, whatever. And crucially, it needs to provide an immediate, definitive email confirmation that the cancellation is done, requiring no further steps from the user.
And transparency has to become the absolute default, right? Getting rid of all those sneaky pre-selected checkboxes for auto-renewal or extra data collection.
Yes, exactly. They need to implement what's called balanced choice architecture. Acceptance and refusal options must have equal visual prominence and require the same amount of effort. So if the Accept All button is big, bold, and brightly colored, the Reject All or Manage Preferences button must have identical visual weight and be just as easy to find and click. No more burying options, no graying them out, no misleading labels like most popular.
Which really implies a shift in corporate culture, doesn't it? And organizational accountability, not just tweaking a few UI elements.
Precisely. Companies really need to integrate formal ethics checkpoints directly into their design and development workflows. They need to actively prohibit A/B tests that are designed solely to increase user friction or confusion. And the metrics need to shift too. Move away from just looking at pure short-term conversion rates towards more balanced scorecards that prioritize things like long-term user trust, satisfaction, and genuine retention based on value, not tricks. Because those short-term data wins that rely on manipulation, they almost invariably translate into massive long-term losses in user trust.
Yeah, well, this deep dive has really highlighted that fundamental tension, hasn't it? Between a business's perhaps understandable desire for maximum recurring revenue and the absolute necessity of maintaining consumer trust. It seems clear now that dark patterns are fully on the regulatory radar and that Spotlight is only getting more intense, which, should give every consumer out there some hope.
Indeed, it should. But perhaps here's the provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider as these digital services become exponentially more complex and integrated into our lives. We're already living in a world of incredibly sophisticated AI-driven personalization. AI that learns our viewing habits, our reading preferences, our content consumption patterns in minute detail. What happens when that same powerful technology is harnessed not just to personalize recommendations, but to personalize manipulation?
Wow. You mean like the system identifying and then specifically exploiting the unique cognitive weaknesses or biases of individual users, tailoring the dark patterns just for them to keep them perpetually subscribed?
That's the potential future we need to think about. That level of targeted algorithmic manipulation demands our constant vigilance. It demands a continued, intense focus on ethical design principles and robust legal frameworks that draw a very clear, unyielding line between what's permissible persuasion and what constitutes outright digital coercion.